and we will officially start, if you are okay.
Yes, we can start. We are live.
Thank you very much for coming. This is Bogazici Institute Tuesday seminars in conjunction with the Center for Life Sciences and Technologies and Istanbul Health Industry Cluster. Today we have a guest from all the way from Netherlands, Hine van Os. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's the General Manager of National eHealth Living Lab, which is an interesting concept, and it will be I'm very excited to hear him talk about his own personal research experience there, as well as the overall mission of the National eHealth Living Lab, which is focusing on digital health and both research and its translation. Great to see you here, Heinz, and the floor is all yours.
Yes. Thank you so much for the invitation of speaking here and telling you more about what we do at NeLL. And very happy to answer all your questions also at the end of the talk. So I will not, my presentation will not be too long. Maybe first a little bit about myself. So my name is Hine van Os. So you were almost completely correct, Cengiz Han. It's a difficult Dutch name. I have a medical background. I studied medicine at the Leiden University Medical Center. And I'm currently in the last stage of my PhD, where I focus on decision support systems for cardiovascular disease and what the potential added value of artificial intelligence is in these decision support systems. And since now 3 years, I'm general manager at the National eHealth Living Lab, NeLL. So yeah, maybe first to start to tell you a little bit about what we see as eHealth or digital health, because a lot of different stakeholders tend to have different interpretations of this. So the way we see eHealth it's basically a synonym with digital health. It is really an umbrella term for any application that has to do with healthcare and digital, very broad definition. So you could say a spectrum between spectrum of, on one side, digital diaries for food intake for diabetic patients, until the other side of the spectrum, decision support with AI on the intensive care and everything in between. But what we will see is that the challenges for implementation and upscaling of all these different applications, they have a lot of similarities, and this is really what we are looking at NeLL. Maybe also to tell you a little bit about the status of digital health, of eHealth in the Netherlands. I think what is a very good thing is that more and more healthcare professionals are getting acquainted with eHealth, are so interested in using it or are already using it in the first place. And also a very good thing is that the patients, they are becoming more and more acquainted with it. There is overall comparatively good health literacy, digital literacy in the Netherlands. Vast majority of people having smartphones, although of course there is still a lot to be gained in that respect. Also in the Netherlands, there is also a lot of people, about 2 million of our total population of 17 million people, that do not have a good literacy. So there's lots to be gained to make digital health also for them very useful. But overall, you could say there's a lot of innovation going on in the Netherlands at the moment when it comes to digital health. And it is very important that these developments are there, because you could say that currently there is a tsunami of chronic disease coming our way because of the aging of the Dutch population and many European populations at the moment. A lot of, with age, a lot of chronic disease, but also comorbidity, multiple chronic diseases at the same time. It is very important to keep the quality of care sustainable, and also to improve quality of care by more personalized care, by making care blended, clinical care blended with digital care, to make it more personal, and also to enable the patient to be more at the helm of their own care and disease management. So digital health would be very well able to guide that shift in thinking, to have the patient more at the center of care processes. And with that is also a very important improvement for the workflow of healthcare professionals. Because at the moment, because of this, what I just talked about, this tsunami of chronic disease, multimorbidity that is coming our way. Of course, with that, there comes a lot of costs also, but maybe even more urgently, on the labor market, there's a lot more healthcare professionals are needed. So we're now around 1 in 11, I believe, people work in healthcare. In a couple of decades, if we do not change anything, that should be 1 in 4 people, which is really not realistic. So there's really a huge problem coming our way. And we think, and now we think that in multiple different ways, digital health can offer opportunities. I will give you a couple of examples later. And so, but in order to implement and upscale eHealth in care processes, we see in many projects that we do or we are involved in, we see a lot of important hurdles. And here they are listed some of the what we think are the most important hurdles, and also some solutions that we are now working on together with a lot of experts in the field. One important hurdle is that we all see now there's an explosion of health and personal data coming from healthcare processes, big data context that you could harness to personalize digital health applications, to train decision support systems with. But it is very complex to unlock these data. We have a legal framework, the GDPR, which is relatively recent in Europe, which makes it quite difficult for a lot of healthcare developers to really unlock the value that is in these big data sets. So it is very important that we all know how to work correctly with this legal framework. So this is something that we are working on with an expert group on this topic, with also lawyers, different legal institutes in the Netherlands, how to make this more easy for eHealth developers. Another very important hurdle is how to correctly implement digital health in care processes, because I believe more often than not, it is not as simple as placing a certain point solution, a certain technological point solution in clinical care like it is currently organized. More often than not, you really have to change the basis, change the care process altogether, change the care paths is usually how we look at these care processes. And there's also a huge opportunity to make these care paths much more patient-centered, because what you now have in, for example, the Netherlands, is that care is being delivered in different echelons, different silos. So you have primary care and then hospital care, which is divided in secondary care and more specialized tertiary care. And often between these silos, there is a lot of data lock-in, for example, and healthcare professionals working in very different worlds, so you will. So actually making these care paths much more patient-centered and also transcending these organizational silos could also really benefit the patient. But it is a hurdle nonetheless, organizational one. With this reorganization of care, you also will need to reorganize the financing of this care. So this is also a hurdle that we take very seriously at NeLL, and we are collaborating with healthcare insurers and government bodies that handle this topic to see where do our current financial structures apply and where would we perhaps need new forms so we can also finance this new structured healthcare the right way. And maybe, well, last but definitely not least, is how do we know that that eHealth propositions, that eHealth products are safe and are effective. And what you have seen for many years is that there were a lot of initiatives, a lot of pilots that started implementing products in care, but scientific validation of these propositions, they lagged a bit. And to some extent, of course, it is important to start and incrementally improve as you start in practice. But at some point, you will need to show the world that what you do is also effective. Is something you need to also something that a healthcare professional needs. Healthcare professional needs the affirmation that what he or she prescribes when it comes to digital health also works, is safe. And of course, also it's important for healthcare insurers to know, okay, which digital health propositions should I reimburse. So a very important thing that we're doing it now is also scientifically validating eHealth propositions. It is the clinical effectiveness, but also, for example, the implementation of a proposition. Is it well implemented in care processes? Does it lead to improved patient experience? Does it lead to saved costs or time saving for the healthcare professionals? So let me now tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. You could say in one sentence, NeLL is the open, independent, knowledge-driven community on digital health. And we have different types of activities. So we have we do a lot of projects with different kinds of stakeholders, care groups all across the Netherlands, also internationally. But also a lot of companies, SMEs, larger companies, big tech and pharma, but also governmental bodies. This research focuses mostly on scientific research of eHealth propositions, but also on how to make sure that you can implement them the right way, how you can correctly involve the end users in creating them. Further, we see that in the Netherlands, even in the Netherlands, which is, well, it's quite a small country, especially if you compare it to a very large country like Turkey. Even in the Netherlands, there's so many groups that are sometimes working on quite similar topics. But some challenges are too large to just face as a single group. So what we really try is where we can and where it is fitting to steer for collaboration. What is also important to note, I think, is that for a correct implementation and upscaling of eHealth, there is an enormous amount of different specialties that need to be involved. You are talking about very often data scientists, software engineers, but also researchers, doctors, nurses. Of course, to have patients involved already from the start, but also designers, people that think about, okay, will this digital health proposition also be fitting for someone with perhaps low health literacy? So there are so many different parties, different specialties that need to be involved for the successful creation of digital health, that NeLL really tries to be a platform where all these different parties can come together, can work together. So this is also what you see in the NeLL team. It's very diverse. You have, well, what I just said, data scientists, designers, doctors, different types of doctors, also general practitioners, different types of specialists, all together in one team. A lot of people also are still working for some part as doctor, psychologist, combining it with their research work. So this is, I think, also a very important function of NeLL. All the knowledge and experience that we gain from projects, we try to share as much as possible via scientific publications, also non-scientific publications, social media even. We try to give advice to researchers. Also, we collaborate with the Ministry of Health, for example. So this is to give you an idea of what NeLL does. Currently, to give you a certain sense of the quantity of projects, we are involved in around 50 projects to a more or lesser extent, depending on the project, in a very wide range in healthcare topics also. So from psychiatry, mental health to primary care and cardiology to internal medicine. I think what is very important also is that for every project that we do, we have certain principles. A very important principle is co-creation, that really from the start, you involve all the relevant end users. And these are always, to some extent, the patient or the citizen, and different types of healthcare professionals, but can also sometimes be the health care insurer. If you really look at the roadmap towards reimbursement of a certain proposition, we believe that scientific research is a very important tool to show to everyone that something works, something is safe. And we also believe in open access when we publish something. And so this is also how our projects are formed. They will need to comply with several principles. So the ones I just mentioned, but also we have to see that a project that we do really solves a problem that is felt in practice. And we also need to see whether it will be scalable in the end. That is not just a point solution that only fits with one IT system, for example, but it's really something that you could really make an impact with in Dutch healthcare or healthcare internationally. And also something I just said something about the very different people that are involved in NeLL. Some I did not mention yet. As you can also see, people that are involved in policy. So collaboration with different governmental bodies. For example, when you talk about different types of structural financing of healthcare, we work a lot with these type of bodies. Yeah. So this is the NeLL team. I do admit that this is a slide that is a little bit older. It's already much larger at this time. But as I said, there is a team consisting of very different disciplines. We have some 10 postdoctoral researchers, or senior researchers, and about 20 to 30 PhD students, depending on how you count. And we have a NeLL board consisting on senior experts in digital health, Netherlands. The management team where I take place in, that takes care of daily operations. I think it's also good to mention that we are, the LUMC is our founding partner, you could say. Other partners we work with, well, this is just a grasp from partners. We have partners that we do projects with that are also often private partners. And we have expert partners that are knowledge organizations and types of foundations that focus on specific topics to help us get the right knowledge to the right project. I think a very good example is Pharos, which is a Dutch organization that really looks at health differences in health literacy and how to bridge those differences. So of course, this is a specialty that is needed in many, if not all, projects. So maybe also, let me just quickly look at the time. Okay, so let me just also give you a more concrete example on what we do at NeLL. I think maybe first to start, a nice example is the Kans voor West consortium that we do based on the European Fund for Regional Development. So this was EU funding that was targeted at making the western region of the Netherlands, the SMEs that are developing healthcare, to make these SMEs to increase opportunities for these SMEs to really implement and upscale their digital health solutions. So this is really about the bottlenecks that I just mentioned. So on the one side, we see that a lot of very important innovation comes from SMEs when it comes to digital health. But at the other hand, many bottlenecks for implementation, upscaling eHealth are really too large to just solve as a single SME. So it is what you often see in the field is that many SMEs, they all talk with different healthcare insurers. They all have sort of similar conversations about, shouldn't we maybe change, should we have a different type or a tailored structural financing solution. So also, of course, from the vantage point of the healthcare insurers, this is complicated because they have to talk to all these different parties. So the bottom line of this consortium, of this large multi-year project, is to look at, can we make solutions with the key stakeholders in the field? So when it comes to structural financing, we're talking about healthcare insurers, governmental bodies. Can we make solutions for these problems that virtually all SMEs in the field have? And we focus on good use of big data and the legal and ethical aspects that come with it, scientific validity, and also mostly how to choose the right type of scientific validity with an eHealth for an eHealth proposition, because the traditional randomized cohort studies, those are very often not very fitting, or one of the things, for example, is you have to keep the intervention stable for the time of the trial, which is in digital health usually very difficult and very artificial. So how can you come up with, how can you fit the right methodology for the right project? And structural financing that I just mentioned.
There is a question.
Of course.
On the chat? So maybe I also start the question with that. When you have this kind of consortium with 6 startups and having this project, is the focus is individually advanced each startup, or more like integration, bringing them together to form a common solution? Yeah. And Ayhan is one of our digital health partners. He's also a part of the leading committee of a similar cooperative innovation committee on digital health in Ankara, in Turkey. Ask a specific question about whether you are using any specific interoperability framework, standards or regulations for projects with multiple products, or for projects that involve several partner collaborations, such as this one here.
Yeah. I think so. This is a very good question. So the first one, that is also in part the answer for the second one, I think. So what we're trying to do here is to see, are there generic solutions to these problems that you could use to then personalize for a specific startup. So let me explain. So there are different startups. So for example, personal health environment, decision support on intensive care, telemonitoring solution for myocardial infarction patients, and telehealth for psychiatric patients, for example. So very different types of solutions. But we have already seen earlier that all these parties have similar challenges in common. So what we try to do is we try to create a generic solution. So one concrete example could be to look at the option of federated learning, secure multi-party computation, which means that you do not put different data sources together, but you let an algorithm visit different data sources and learn along the way. So this really solves a very important privacy problem. So for this generic solution, we look at, how would this fit, for example, a certain startup that we have on board. So we validate the solution with the startup, with the use case, you could say. So what the startups do among each other is really all about knowledge sharing. It's not that we are creating really sort of a shared IT framework with a certain We are really just sharing the knowledge, validating the knowledge, and also disseminating this knowledge via literature, both scientific and non-scientific. But of course, there is a lot of interest in such frameworks, especially when you look at data use. Of course, there are multiple ISO norms when it comes to this. Very importantly, there is also the MDR in the Netherlands, the medical devices regulation is an important part of our frameworks, and a new ISO norm for digital health, which I will tell you a little bit about after this. So indeed, there is a lot of interest in frameworks, also in this consortium, because it helps us all a lot in upscaling.
So there's also another follow-up question while we're interrupted to you already. Maybe I can follow up on that. Yeah. It says, in that sense, is NeLL, I mean, everybody is trying to put NeLL into their framework of their experience. So is it okay to see NeLL as a kind of an accelerator?
Yeah.
Provide, the question is, does NeLL provide for partners and stakeholders, apart from research, or in terms of TRL development, financing, technology to market acceleration, in a sense?
You could see NeLL like a kind of accelerator, but with an important difference that we really have the focus on scientific validity and also open access. So what we do is really, in the end, it is to bring the field further, and not to take, for example, also commercial interest in a product that we work with. So this is something we do not do, but you would see in some sort of acceleration collaborations. We do not take IP, for example, because we believe that our role is really on the scientific side. So, but to work adjacent to an accelerator, which really has the more hardcore financial, commercial expertise. This is, of course, something we do or would be able to do. So we are relatively less on the financial and not so much on the commercial side of things. But of course, we do see the roadmap towards upscaling. Of course, financing is a very important part. So we do take that as a very important thing in our work in projects. And then we look at also scientific funding, but also non-scientific funding.
I see. So there is also a follow-up question. Then this platform membership or something, thinking of it from a cluster perspective, is essentially free, right? There is no membership fees. So how do you eventually sustain yourself is the question, because these are the questions that we've been asking ourselves as a cluster.
Of course, no, that's also a very important question. So this is something that NeLL is not, that's maybe also good to mention. NeLL is only 3 years old. So of course, this is also something that is slowly developing. But if you look at the current situation, and I think that it is like we currently do it, we have for every project that we do need funding for the hours of the research that are involved in the project, with also some overhead. So that is our current business case, is really about doing these projects that we do really for a more societal, directly societal benefit with, for example, other hospitals. We have virtually no overhead, but when we work with private partners that in the end could use, for them this could be a step towards upscaling, then we do ask for a certain overhead. So this is how we fund ourselves, and very importantly, scientific grants. So we write together with parties a lot of scientific grants, all the different grants you can imagine. So different types of Dutch grants, but also European grants. So this is also a very important part of the business case, because we have to keep in mind the team at NeLL. Really, mostly they are researchers that are also, for example, part-time doctor, psychologist, or something else, but researchers researchers, of course, write a lot of scientific grants.
Thank you very much. Maybe please continue with the presentations, and then we will maybe collect the rest of them towards the end. If there are any urgent burning questions, I will just raise my hand.
Yeah, but that is also totally fine. If there are questions in the meantime, just fire away. There's no problem at all. So I think another concrete example of the things that we're doing at the moment is working towards a single app assessment framework in the Netherlands. So we do this in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and also with a lot of Dutch stakeholders. And we are seeing, okay, we are trying to answer a very important question: how can you see whether eHealth propositions have the right quality to be safe, to be that they will be properly used and also sustainably used by the end users, the patients, the healthcare professionals. And quality has many aspects, of course. So you have the usability, the accessibility. That is very different for people with different types of different health literacy. Proposition makes a health claim. So they say this will work diagnosing cardiovascular disease on an earlier basis. Well, what evidence is provided for this health claim, and what evidence should be provided? Should it be an observational scientific study, or should it really be a randomized controlled trial? Safety, privacy issues, also when it comes to data sharing, and ethics of the entire proposition and the implementation. So in a very broad sense, we will need to know something about quality to also show citizens that things are safe to use. This has been a very big problem for the implementation of eHealth in different ways. You could make an artificial, maybe almost distinction between more the eHealth that is focusing on well-being and health, like for example running apps and meditation apps also for mental health on the one side of the spectrum, and on the other side of the spectrum really hardcore decision support in hospitals, diagnostics software, and of course these quality criteria are more demanding at the side of the spectrum where risks are higher, but nonetheless these quality criteria apply basically for the whole spectrum. And what we saw so far is that on the sort of well-being part of the spectrum, that is where citizens can directly download apps from app stores. So you have, of course, the Apple, Google, the Play Store, but you also, Netherlands already had very good initiatives for bundling these apps and showing a selection of which professionals thought these would be safe and effective. But still, citizens really did not know where to begin, because you have some 350,000 health-related apps in app stores. So for citizens, it was very difficult to start with digital health for their own lifestyle improvement, for example. While that is a huge opportunity for society, that citizens really start with that themselves. At the other side of the spectrum, where you really need a healthcare professional involvement, or even digital health that is really directed towards healthcare professionals. Also, professionals did not know where to begin, did not know what is safe. And not only the healthcare professionals, but also hospitals that sometimes need to buy certain software, or the healthcare insurers that need to reimburse it. So the fact that clarity on overall digital health quality was missing was a huge hurdle in the uptake, implementation, and upscaling. So already since a year and a half, there is a very large undertaking on the way, which is the ISO for digital health. That a close colleague, Peter Hogendoorn, is one of the organizers for this. That is currently in the latest phase of the European steps that you need to take to really arrive at an ISO norm. This is an ISO norm that really captures all these quality criteria and to make it into a international standard that all countries could use. So this is very far in the European process of being accepted now. This will be a very important step forward, so that everyone knows, both the citizens when it comes to well-being apps, as also the healthcare professionals, when it comes to the more heavy digital health, what could you safely use? And what we did with this Dutch app assessment framework is really to use this ISO norm as a basis to build the Dutch framework on it. But what is very important is that you, with only a framework, which is, well, in a sense, is a list of questions with potential answers, you also need a way to effectively, on a large scale, apply to really assess a large number of apps, because of course there are many potentially useful apps, or 350,000 in the app stores. Of course, you can immediately throw away many hundreds thousands because of very simple quality measures. But still, many thousands will probably remain. So now we're looking at, okay, can you also find the right way of working on really assessing, correctly assessing these apps on a large scale. So this is what is going on right now. But what would be a very important development towards the implementation and upscaling of digital health in the Netherlands, I believe also in Europe. So an even more practical example, but no less important example that we of a project that we work at NeLL is the box. It's called the box. It's a telemonitoring solution that could be applicable to virtually all types of disease. And it's really it really signifies a paradigm shift of something that we just talked about. It's really about reorganizing care, much more patient with the patient at the center. So it is, instead of thinking in these different silos of primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, it's really about creating care paths that are patient-centered, and then to see which technologies are available to make this happen. So if you look on the very practical side, what is the box? It is literally a box, quite literally, with devices that are needed for certain diseases. So now, for example, we have example of patients after having had a myocardial infarction, a heart infarction. So these patients will get at-home discharge. They will get a blood pressure device, a scale, activity tracker, ECG assessment for the heart rhythm. And then the care path is changed from the old going to the hospital for inpatient visits 4 times a year to 2 inpatient visits, and the rest will be replaced with teleconsultation via video. In the meantime, the patient will have all these devices to assess blood pressure in a certain frequency. So what you will get is, this was really one of the first steps of the box, and what you will get is that you will be able to replace certain clinical visits with teleconsultations, which has a couple of benefits also for the patient. The patient doesn't have to go to the hospital all the way, and some patients live quite far. Although, of course, for Turkish, if you make the comparison, nothing is really far in the Netherlands. But also importantly, the patient will have all these devices to monitor all types of vital health parameters. So the patient will likely be much more inclined to really be at the helm of his or her own risk management. So these are, of course, things we're also researching. So how would having these devices and working with the devices, also with via an app with coaching, how does it exactly increase patient empowerment? How will this translate in the end also a better blood pressure that is in the right range? This is, of course, are still things that we are researching. This is a really important step towards this sort of paradigm shift of reorganizing healthcare. And what you see now for the box, it has scaled to many more care paths, also for diabetes, stroke, but also high blood pressure during pregnancy. And also, very importantly, we are now trying to reach many more healthcare professionals. So not only specialists in the hospital, but also the general practitioners and the nurses in nursing homes. So to see if you can organize the care path really around the patient instead of from the viewpoint of the healthcare professional. Yeah, so this is what I just said. Yeah, so maybe in summary, NeLL is really aiming that to make care sustainable towards the future. We try to really integrate digital health in current care processes, so blended care, as you will, which really also fits the quadruple aim that you very often hear nowadays. So really take the perspective of the patient as the center of the universe, like it's often said in medical schools, but also looking at the workflow of the healthcare professionals, looking at the system as a whole when it comes at staffing and cost effectiveness. And yeah, we are very happy to collaborate also with you. And please let me know if you think that there are opportunities for that. So I think it's yeah, great to have had the opportunity to have a talk here, and very happy to answer your questions, of course.
Excellent. I also thought you will be presenting, tell a few sentences about your research.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I can definitely tell you a little bit about.
Maybe a few minutes, just a couple of minutes. We will also have, we should leave some time for questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, so I don't have slides for this, but it's my own research, so that's definitely doable. So what we're basically trying to figure out is that, well, also something I just mentioned, you have now these big data sets that are locked away in electronic health records. So we're now looking at the electronic health records of the general practitioners in the Netherlands. So we have a data set of about 3 million patients that belong to different general practitioners. And this is linked to the routine data of the hospitals in this area in the Netherlands. So you have a very rich, large data set, but it's very important to note it is routine data. So these data are not collected in scientific processes of trials. Of course, the quality in trials is always much higher. Clinical processes, there is always a time constraint, so the data quality is quite low. So the question we really have is, can we use these data to improve the clinical workflow when it comes to cardiovascular risk management? And so then so to answer that question, you have to look at, okay, which decisions are made by whom in this cardiovascular risk management that we have in the Netherlands. And you have different stakeholders that, of course, play an important role. You have the cardiologists, the neurologists that discharge someone after a myocardial infarction or a stroke, and they, of course, already start the prevention for next event. But then the patients are under the supervision of the general practitioner. And within the primary care practice, it is the practice nurses that really look at which patients should come how often to the practice. So, and right now we're looking at with these data, can you help the practice nurses to make the right decisions on who you should see how often? This is a quite important question because the chronic diseases, the number of chronic diseases are rapidly increasing, especially if you look at coming decade. So helping them with these type of decisions would be really helpful to keep primary care sustainable. So this is in short what we're doing. But to do this correctly, you need to basically cover a lot of the challenges that I just talked about. So I think the data quality issues. That's also epidemiological challenge, if you will. How to make sure that the algorithms that you make, especially when you use more complex algorithms like machine learning algorithms, how do you make sure that they are still safe? And that you do not see anymore the problems because you made your model more complex. But also, how do you implement such a thing correctly in the workflow of these practice nurses? This is a much more organizational challenge. So there's very different types of challenges. So what you see is that you need very different types of specialities that work together on such a project. And this is luckily something that NeLL provides in the network that we have. So yeah, in short.
Thank you very much. Why don't we stop the screen sharing so we see each other's more in And then the floor, I'm not sure whether I can see the